friends. This is Christopher Davis-Shannon, and today I'm going to break down for you how to play the 1908 song Shine on Harvest Moon. We're going to include the verse in this one because it is still commonly performed today. So as usual, we'll start off with a play along with all the chords and lyrics and the tabs for the chord melody. Then later on the video, I'll break down each and every section for you, as well as show you some fun voicings that we can use for the chorus of this tune. So don't forget to like and subscribe and do other things that I hate telling you to do, but being on YouTube necessitates me doing. Let's get started. The night was mighty dark, so you could hardly see, for the moon refused to shine. Couple sitting underneath the willow tree for love, they pine. Little Mad was kind of afraid of darkness, so she said, I guess I'll go. The boy began to sigh, looked up in the sky, told the moon his little tale of woe. Oh, shine on, harvest moon, up in the sky. I ain't had no lovin' since April, January, June, or July. Snow time ain't no time to stay outdoors and spoon. So shine on, harvest moon, for me and my gal. The first verse of this tune, as well as sometimes even the second verse, are still included in most versions to this day, so they're very much worth learning. So while this song is in the key of G major, we're actually starting out in the relative minor, or the minor key that is the same as G major, which in this case is E minor. So we're going to be starting out on an E minor chord, and we're going to play that for 2 beats and then come down to a B7th chord. So you know that these are the same exact shape, just hopping down 1 string. Then we're going to come right back to our E minor chord, and then this time we're going to an A minor chord. This might not be a voicing that you're as familiar with, but this is the one that I'm going to be using throughout this lesson. After this, we go back to our E minor, and then we're coming down to a C9th chord, which is just our C7th chord, but we're going to add a D on the 2nd fret of our C string. And that's going to bring us to a B7th again. So let's just listen to these first 4 bars of the intro. 2, 3, 4. Good, let's try those first 4 together and see how it sounds. 1, 2, 3, 4. Good, and then we're going to repeat what happened in that first part. We're going to go E minor to B7th again. And now we're going to go back to E minor, but we're going to make this an E minor 7th. And while this is not necessary, we could go back to an E minor here. It makes the next change a lot easier. We always want to be looking ahead to see what we can do to help ourselves out when we're going to our next change. So we're going to go to this E minor 7th here, because in the later half of the bar, we're going to add the first finger on the 1st fret of the G string to give us a regular old E7th chord, which brings our ear to an A7th. And we're going to play that for a measure and then up to a D7th chord. And the D7th is telling us that we're coming back to where we need to be, which that resolution we haven't seen yet in the song, which is to G major, to establish the actual tonic of the key. So let's listen to these next 4 bars of the tune. 2, 3, 4. But instead of resolving here like we really want to at the end of the phrase, we stay on the D7th chord for 2 more measures now. And then finally the composer lets us go to a G chord. And I've used a G sixth chord, which you'll see is the same as E minor seventh, but because we're setting it up with a D seventh chord in this case, it's going to give us a major tonality instead of minor. The joy of 4 strings and limited voicing options. So play this G sixth for 4 measures. And then we're going to have this little bit that goes back and forth between an A seventh and a B minor seventh. So all we need for B minor seventh is just to lay our finger across the 2nd fret here. And we're going to do that 2 times, each 2 beats apiece. And then we come down to E minor seventh for 2 beats to A seventh, and then finally D seventh. Let's try that section just starting at the A seventh chord here. I think we can do a D seventh to G just to see how this all sounds, and then we'll put together the entire verse. So these last 4 bars of the verse sound a little bit something like this. All right, let's try those last 4 together. 1, 2, 3, 4. Good. Now let's try the entire verse together and see how this sounds. 2, 3, 4. The night was mighty dark, so you could hardly see, for the moon refused to shine. A couple sitting underneath the willow tree, for love they pined. Little maid was kind of afraid of darkness, so she said, I guess I'll go. The boy began to cry, looked up in the sky, told the moon his little tale of woe. And that brings us to the chorus of the tune, so let's look at that. So as we looked at earlier, this tune is in G major, and that big old D seventh at the end of the verse really wants to resolve to a G major chord, but we don't get to that here. We actually go to an E seventh chord and start a little circle progression on the 6th chord in the key of G, our E seventh. We're going to play that for 2 measures, and then go to an A seventh chord. And you've probably seen this progression before. And then from there, after 2 measures, we're going to go to D seventh, and finally resolve to G. So let's hear those first few bars of the chorus of the tune. So when we get to this G, then we have a very interesting turnaround because this form repeats and we need to get back to that E seventh chord. And the way that we do this is by walking up. We have a G sixth chord that we land on, and then we go to A minor, same as we used in the verse, and then a G diminished 7th chord, which is going to be open, 1, and then slide that on up back to your G sixth chord. So our little turnaround, all 2 beats apiece, sounds like this. And then we repeat what just happened. We go back to that E seventh, which since we're on a G sixth, all we have to do is put down that first finger to get us an E seventh chord, cycle back to an A seventh, and then D seventh. And at the very end, our final turnaround is just a little bit different because we are going to resolve to the G. So we're going to land on a G sixth, and we're going to now play the C ninth chord that we played back in the verse. And the C9 is actually important here. In the verse, we could sub out a C7th, it would work, but our melody note here over the C9 chord is a D. It is that 9th. And then resolving finally to our G6th chord. So let's see if we can try this entire chorus of the song together, starting on an E7th. 2, 3, 4. Shine on, harvest moon, up in the sky. I ain't had no lovin' since April, January, June, or July. Snow time ain't no time to stay altos and spoon. So shine on, harvest moon, for me and my gal. So now let's look at some different chords that we can play over top of this chorus section. So this little circle progression that we see, our 6-2-5-1, crops up rather frequently. If you've ever played a song like 5'2", has anybody seen My Gal, or I've Got Rhythm, many bridges of tunes incorporate this same movement of dominant chords throughout. So by learning this cycle of chords, we're actually learning a very common chord progression. But let's talk about one thing before we get into the different voicings that we can use here, and that's that E7th chord. If we look at the music, or even just listen to it, that first note of the melody doesn't really match up. It's a C, or actually in this case it's really a B sharp, because this is our sharp 5 over top of the E7th chord. And what we can do here to make this sound more natural is to add the sharp 5th to our chord. So regardless of where we're playing an E7th, be here or here or here, it doesn't matter. We can find that B and make it sharp. In the case of this first E7th chord, our B is on the 2nd fret of the A string, so we can just add our pinky, and there's our melody note integrated into the chord. Shine on, and then resolve it down on beat 2, and we'll see that C crops up again for the first beat of the second measure of the chorus, but because it's sort of fleeting there, we don't really need it, but I do find it important to add this E7th with a sharp 5th in there. It really helps support what's going on in the melody. So as we go through here, there's all different chord voicings that we can use throughout this. And this is a great exercise because, as I said, this is a common movement of chords. So of course we can play the basic chords, E7th, A7th, D7th, but we can also walk ourselves down by using this voicing right here for our E7th. If we're going to do this, we want to ask ourselves, where is that sharp 5? And our B in this case is on the G string. So there's our sharp 5 with our B sharp. So we still get that tension and resolution. So as we're on this E7th, we don't want to hop all the way back down here. So let's look at two different options we can really go to here. We can go to this A7th, which is really the same as our G7th chord, just moved on up, right? So our A7th. But a voicing that I like much better for this A7th, it's the same exact notes in a slightly different order, is utilizing the high G string and playing this shape here. So we get this movement. And that's much easier to play than to go all the way down here for the chord. But whichever suits you best. And if you're on low G, this one will sound better because we'll have the root and not the 7th in the bass. But on high G, I find this voicing works better. And as I'm going down to the D7th, this standard one is pretty darn accessible here. We don't really need to get fancy. We don't have to throw things in just to make it complicated. If we wanted to do a different D7th voicing here, we could do this one up here, which we look at as our A7th chord, barred on up. So now let's look at the turnaround of this tune. As we land on this G6th here, we can really just walk up in the bass of this, up the C string, with these same chords with slightly different voicings. So we land on our standard G6th chord, and then we walk up to an A minor 7th. So we're going D to E on the C string. And then for our diminished chord, remember that diminished chords repeat across the fingerboard. So as we have it down here, that same chord shape exists, 3-4, 3-4. That's also a G diminished chord, sharing this E here. Right? So we end up with a sound like this. And then we resolve to a G6th, but instead of hopping down here, let's keep that E right here. So we end up with this voicing for G6th, which sets us up to play that alternate E7th chord down here, moving on down our little cycle of chords. And then for our final turnaround, that C9, say we resolve to this G6th here, well, how about an alternate C9 voicing that we can use? Instead of putting it down here, we have our barred C7, the same we talked about for the D7th chord, but we can keep this D here, that's our 9th. But this is really nice voicing because they're so close to each other. This makes our G6th and C7th have only one note difference between it, and that's the B to the B flat on our G string. And that's a really nice tight movement between chords that still complements the melody. So let's listen to just an alternate way that we could sort of play this, this chorus section. Start on E7th up here. The chorus of this tune fits really well on ukulele, just our standard open position chords with only a few slight modifications and some individually plucked notes to get us a melody. So this works really well as an intro. What I've taken is the back half of the tune, the last 8 measures, and just arranged a bit of a chord melody to get us into it. So we're starting on our E7, but it's going to be the sharp 5 here. So we're going to start out with our pinky down on the B sharp on the 3rd fret of our A string. And then resolve down on beat 3 to just the regular old B. And we'll strum each of these chords twice. So our first measure will be. And then we just repeat that, but half the time for each, right? They're quarter notes now. So we go. Then our final 2 notes are a G sharp and an E in this measure. Well, they're both contained in the chord. So we can just pluck the G sharp that's on our G string and then the open E. So here's our first 2 measures of the chord melody. Now we land on an A7th chord, but our melody note is the C sharp that's on our C string here. So we can't really just strum through our chord. We'll pluck this individually and then strum the whole chord. And then we're just going to do a little melodic line together. So we're going to play an open C, hammer onto the C sharp, open E, and then the 9th, the B on the 2nd fret of our A string. So let's listen to that A7th measure. And then we just strum through our A7th chord for the rest of the measure. So here's our first 4 measures of the chord melody section. Now if you recall, our next chord is a D7th, but actually our melody note is the 6th. It's again that B on the 2nd fret of our A string. So we just bar straight across and play a D6th chord here. We don't actually need the 7th in here. So we'll strum through that twice, and then pluck the A that's on the 2nd fret of our G string. It's already down in the chord. Strum through again. And then this repeats the melodic rhythm, right, of what we played over top of the E7th. We just cut it in half the second measure. So we have 2 half notes, and then we have 2 quarter notes in the second measure. So our D6th bars sound like this. And then we're going to have to put our pinky down, because our next melody note is the D on the 5th fret of our A string, and resolve right back down to that B. And then we're going to go to our G6th chord, and although we have the C9th nestled in here, harmonically, we can actually play all these melody notes with just the G6th chord down. So we'll pluck the G, strum through, and then we're going to pluck our inner strings, D, E, D, E, G. So here's our G6th bar. And then we have to get to the verse of the tune. If you recall, that's in E minor, not G major. So we're just going to put a big old B7th chord at the end here. We'll bar across. We'll go 2, 3, 2, 2, because then we can add the sharp 5, giving a nod to some of that harmony that happens in this chorus section of the song, with really harping on that sharp 5 over the E7th. We'll do that on the B7th here. So we're just adding an F double sharp on the 3rd fret of our E string. So let me play these last 4 bars of the chord melody intro for you, and then we'll try the whole thing together. Let's try the whole chord melody. 1, 2, 3, 4. And that sets us up to get into the verse. So this gives you a little bit to think about in regards to playing this tune. And as I said, this is a very common progression that we're going to see in many other songs, minus the turnaround, which is rather specific to this. So it's worth experimenting with different voicings so you have your options open should you see another chord progression such as this. If you would like the tabs to the chord melody intro as well as a lead sheet to go around with this, this is up on my Patreon page where we have always accompanying materials to go with each of these video lessons. I'll see you all over there.